Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us this morning. I'm Karen Tucker, CEO of the Churchill Club, and our program this morning is called Disrupt or Be Disrupted. We have an exciting discussion in store with a dream team of disruptors, starting with David Barrett of Expensify, Nate Blecharczyk, of Airbnb, and Migicovsky of Pebble. Greg Duffy is on his way and will pop up on the stage when he arrives. They will be led in conversation by James McQuivey of Forrester Research. Thank you all very much for being here. And I would also like to extend a big thank you to our research partner, Forrester. Certainly you, James, but also Phil LeClaire and Cassandra Zobel for your invaluable assistance in developing this program. A brief introduction to Churchill Club for the new guests in the audience. We have been, since 1985, convening Silicon Valley-style conversations where like minds can connect with each other and with ideas. And ideas are going to fall into the umbrella of Churchill's mission, which drives us every day, and that is to encourage innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. We do this through the up to 40 programs that we present each year, and we are a nonprofit member-supported organization, and if you have an interest in joining us, we would welcome you to do so. We have an outstanding set of programs coming up before the end of the month, starting next Monday on June 17, with Revolutions in the Making, which is a close look at the 12 most economically disruptive technologies that are with us today, identified a few weeks ago by McKinsey, such as mobile internet, the Internet of Things, advanced generation genomics, and this is a really good opportunity to give yourself a high-quality overview on these key opportunities for innovation and economic growth. And after that, on June 26th, there is a breakfast program that explores what makes standout company performers different. That's based on extensive new research conducted by Deloitte, and it's another great opportunity to learn and leave with new insights. We have many events in the pipeline for you, so please keep an eye on us, either by getting on the mailing list or just checking out the website as the new programs get posted. And if you are tweeting this morning, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you will find other Twitter codes in the printed programs on your tables. Our moderator, James McQuivey, is VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. James is the leading analyst tracking the development of digital disruption, and his insights are in high demand, as you might imagine. He comments regularly in publications such as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and he appears often in outlets such as CNBC and NPR. Contribution toward better understanding and taking positive advantage of the myriad radical transformations occurring around us now and into the future. We look forward to the conversation that James will lead for us this morning. Please give your warmest Churchill Club welcome to James McQuivey.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I realize getting up in the morning to come to breakfast is a nice to have, not necessarily a must-do, but I'm told that we've over-enrolled this session and gone far beyond what we would typically expect for breakfast, so that's great. I won't pretend you're here to see me. I think you, as I, are impressed with the dream team that we've assembled up here, and we started calling it a dream team informally. So I'm very excited to introduce them in just a minute. First of all, just set a context.
I've been doing my research on digital disruption at Forrester for a couple of years now. It got to a point where we realized that this wasn't just something that was happening only in Silicon Valley, although here we are. It wasn't only happening with startups, although the list of people we have on the stage today definitely represents that. It was happening in every industry that I would peek into, industries I know nothing about. I actually spent some time with the CTO of one of the world's largest cement manufacturers. he called and said, I wanted to meet. And I thought, what in the world? Is he going to talk about embedding digital sensors in cement? That would be cool. I expected that. But no, he said, what digital is doing for us is that now we have these off-the-shelf technologies. We have these already created networks that we can exploit to track our supply chain. You know, they source materials from 90 countries around the world. And then it has to be then redelivered to 140 countries where they distribute their products. And that whole supply chain management used to be an incredibly expensive thing to stay on top of, and they would have tens of millions of dollars of waste every year and fraud and slippage in the inventory management. He says, now we just use phones, GPS, and a whole bunch of networks that someone else made to track materials around the world, and we're saving millions of dollars a month on this. So that kind of digital thinking, that disruptive thinking of saying, how do we use what we already know, what we already have, and just get something better? It's happening even in very, very traditional companies. Now, what's exciting about what we're going to do here today is we're going to talk about maybe some not so traditional companies who have a tendency to lead the way. And the individuals that we have on the panel will certainly be examples themselves of how to think like that. Some of the calls that we've had to prep for this, they've just surprised me with, I won't give away the punchlines, but as they talk about the things that they're doing on a regular basis in their businesses that are very disruptive in the patterns that they're applying, but the outcomes are just wonderful for their customers. And so from the customer's perspective, disruption is a wonderful thing. It's a blessing. You know, if you're sitting over somewhere at a financial services company, disruption feels very painful. But to the consumer, the end user, it's absolutely the best thing that's ever happened to us. And I think we all know that. You take your smartphone out of your pocket and think just how dependent you are on that thing these days. And you realize what the power of what we're talking about here today is. So without further ado and an introduction, what I'll do is join my panelists here. And what I'm going to ask them each to do is introduce themselves. And in the context of introducing who they are and what they do, if you would, comment on something disruptive you've done or seen lately. And you can take whatever license you want with that. So we'll start with David Barrett, CEO of Expensify. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about some disruption you've done or seen lately.
Great. So I'm David. I'm with a company called Expensify. We do expense reports that don't suck. It's a bold vision, but we're improving the world one expense report at a time. And I would say something disruptive. So expense reporting is not exactly, the most cutting edge and sexy industry, or it wouldn't seem so at least. But it has tremendously powerful data. And I guess I would say, in fact, when I was a kid, it's not like I wanted to grow up and be an expense report magnate. It's not like, this is the dream that really comes about initially. In fact, when I started Expensify, the plan was to do something entirely different. And the only reason we did expense reports is because that other plan depended upon the permission of banks. And banks are incredibly risk averse. And so I needed to think, it's like, okay, what's something that seems low risk, that seems boring? Like, what's the dullest thing I can imagine? I'm like, aha, expense reports, of course. And so it was like the Trojan horse to allow me to launch this entirely different product. And so we launched that product. And everyone's like, that's pretty cool, but your expense reports are amazing. I'm like, really? That was the easy part. But now that we're here, we realize that actually expense reporting is an incredibly powerful industry because we know everything about our users, we know, down to like how much they prefer Thai food over sandwiches. We know where they like to get their Thai food. We know where they're going to be before they get there. And we know everything about it. And we know it's super mobile. It's super viral because every time you submit an expense report, you put us in touch with someone more important than you, like your boss, your finance department, and things like this. And so I'd say what we do is disruptive. And I think we're all probably going to talk a lot about the importance of having good design, good product development, and so forth, and having a really excellent experience. But for Expensify, that's a means to an end. And I would say the way that we disrupt our industry is not just by having a better product. It's by having a dramatically lower cost of sale, meaning that we can run our company on such thin margins, such that we acquire customers in such a dramatically different way that our competitors, even if they had the exact same product as us, couldn't even remotely compete because we have a cost of sale which is 10 times lower than anybody else out there, which means that we can sell to a smaller customer, we can sell faster, and we can do it with incredibly thick margins. And so I'd say that what we do is disruptive. It's not just product. It's not just having the sexiest industry known to man. It's about having a business model that leverages the sort of unique dynamics of our industry against the incumbent and is sort of changing the rules of the game.
And in the changing the rules of the game, what you end up doing, if I'm hearing you right, is you expand the range of people who could consider expense reporting as an actual process instead of just sort of manually photocopying or things that.
Yeah.
So you're making the business bigger. You're not just taking business away.
Yeah, and I think that's what I didn't know anything about expense reports when I started, and so just totally making this up as we go along. And there's something nice about being totally naive, because you just have no idea what's stupid. And it's like, I don't know, I'm just going to do whatever people like. And now I think we've realized that expense management is so much bigger than business. It's relevant to everyone who spends money, which is a lot of people. Pretty much everyone, or everyone wants to be at least. And because really to be a business, you have to have income and expenses. Or you hope to have income, but you certainly have expenses. And so it's an incredibly universal thing. And so rather than just being this stodgy enterprise organization with the field sales guy with a gold watch and he shows up and takes someone out to golf, it's like we don't do any of that. It's like for us, we have millions of people who are individuals, contractors, or even just churches are a big demographic because they have a ton of money, very complicated tax status, or students and people tracking health savings accounts. And so I think we've realized expense management is so much bigger than we've ever thought it would be. And because of that, we have this sort of multiplier word of mouth advantage that when we enter into a company, everyone's already heard of us, even though no salesperson has ever called them.
Fabulous. I'm feeling a little like I want to disrupt things here. There's a whole table over there. They can't see us. Guys, am I going to mess things up if I try to scoot this back? It just feels I feel bad for you. Folks, do you mind if we try? So while I'm doing that, I don't want to tear this out of here. I'm just going to have Nathan introduce himself. Nathan Blecharczyk. Did I get that right, Nathan?
Yep, that's right.
I actually rehearsed that before, and I still was nervous about it. Anyway, please, from Airbnb, CTO at Airbnb, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and what makes you disruptive.
Right, so Airbnb is a global community marketplace for space. We make it possible for individuals to rent out their homes, apartments, or any other type of space by the night. And we make it easy for travelers to discover and book that space online. So for example, our users are folks who might travel a lot for business, or maybe they have kids have gone off to college, they have an extra room, they decide to rent it by the night, sometimes only a day a month. And I think it's worth contrasting our platform with vacation rentals to understand the disruption. So the vacation rental industry has been around for forever, a long time. And vacation rentals are typically secondary homes, investment properties. And what we've done differently is we've created a platform that builds trust amongst people and has a business model such that it's free to sign up. And so there's very little friction to getting started. And as a result of doing that, our participants aren't putting up their investment properties on our platform. They're putting up their primary homes, even their extra bedrooms, even the treehouse in the backyard. And if you look at our inventory, 90% of the inventory is stuff that was never available before. And what that means is our product is fundamentally different than any other product that was available previously. And today we have over 400,000 properties available all around the world that have basically just sprung up organically by creating this platform. And by making these properties as simple to book as a hotel, meaning that you have search, you have real-time availability, the payment is handled through the website, meaning that as a traveler, you see something that you like, you pay Airbnb, and we hold your money until after you arrive at the property. And that way, if you need to cancel, or if the property is not as described, you can just call our 24/7 customer support line, and we can give you your money back. By building that kind of trust, that kind of peace of mind, we have far many more travelers staying in this type of accommodation than would have ever entertained this before. And that has just enabled explosive growth. Up through the end of 2012, we had serviced 4 million guests. 3 of the 4 million, though, were in the last year alone. So it gives you a sense of the kind of trajectory we're on.
Wow, so, and in the same way that David is expanding the range of people who would need expense reporting as a service, you're expanding the pool of assets that are available for booking.
Right, and both the guests and the hosts are folks who never anticipated that this is something they wanted to do. But we created a platform that inspired them and empowered them to do something that actually has benefits for both parties.
And let's face it, you're a little insidious with this. I just got an email last night from Airbnb because I am an Airbnb traveler, full disclosure, and I have some stories I could tell. They're great. But your email from last night was, hey, do you have any spare room in your home that you might want to put on the market this summer for summer travelers? And you literally have this thought. It's like, I never thought I would do that. But I do have a spare bedroom with 2 kids away at college. What could we do here?
Well, here's an example of one of our most popular properties. It's actually a treehouse in Burlingame, right? So Burlingame is a neighborhood that no tourist is probably thought to go to on a vacation. And yet, the children of this family were at university. They had used Airbnb to travel to New York. And over the holidays, they came back and they said, you know, Mom and Dad, why don't we're going to put the treehouse on Airbnb. Maybe it was just a joke at the time. Well, 2 years later, that treehouse has made over $100,000, has housed over 1,000 people. It's fully booked for months ahead of time. It's incredible. And never, first of all, you probably never have the idea that you wanted to stay in a treehouse, right? You don't know you want to stay in a treehouse until you see it. When you see it, it evokes all kinds of maybe childhood memories, and you just want to do it, even for one night. So it's incredible, the kinds of things that come up organically when you create a platform. It's much like eBay.
I love the use of the word organic, especially with the treehouse reference. I don't know if that was deliberate. But I think that's what we're going to see across all of these conversations today, is that we're expanding, we're growing. And it's growing in a way that we can't control, but that is very exciting as it happens. So we'll turn next to Eric Migicovsky from Pebble, appropriately sporting a Pebble first generation, I assume?
Yep. Well, actually, this is I think we're on to our 3rd generation. So my name is Eric. I'm the founder of Pebble. We're a company that makes a smartwatch. Our watch talks to your smartphone by Bluetooth and brings you email, text messages, calls, emails, Facebook, all that kind of stuff onto your wrist. But the real power of Pebble is the ability to run apps on your wrist. So there are many developers that are now creating different apps that can run on your wrist. But I didn't really start out to build this product. I started out to build a device that would help me see what was happening on my cell phone while I was bicycling. About 5 years ago, I was living in Holland, where over something like 90% of the people bicycle every single day to and from work or to commute. And I had a brand new phone, and I didn't have the skill set that the Dutch people are born innately with to text while bicycling. So I wanted to see, I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket, and I wanted to see what was happening. So I first came up with a little idea for a bike computer, but then that evolved into a watch that would connect to your phone. That was the original idea about 5 years ago. It's definitely evolved over that period of time. But I think the thing that has stayed constant is the ability to bring some of the data that's sitting locked inside your phone in your pocket out into your everyday life. In our case right now, it's onto the wrist. I think, actually we have our company has some similarities with Airbnb and Expensify in some way, and I think that's the way that we've captured the interest of the crowd. So up until April 2012, we were a typical hardware company, a hardware startup. Meaning we hadn't really succeeded much at all. It's incredibly difficult to work on hardware. There's a lot of extra costs. The timelines are several times longer than software companies. The iteration process is a bit more expensive. But we were fighting our way through. We had already produced, I think, 3 versions of our product by the time we got to last year. We had gone through an incubator here in the Bay Area called Y Combinator. But we still hadn't clicked. We hadn't figured out product market fit. We hadn't captured the attention that people would need to find out about Pebble. So in April, we decided to launch Pebble, which was our new product at the time, on a website called Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a project-based crowdfunding site where project creators all around the world can post what they're working on and explain it to the world, and usually ask for donations in return for rewards. So in our case, we offered up Pebble, the future watch, as a reward for backing our project on Kickstarter. Over the course of 30 days, we had over 68,000 people supporting our project on Kickstarter, financially supporting it. So that was what launched really our company from being a company that made watches in our garage to making tens of thousands of watches that we've shipped worldwide. So being able to explain our product and explain how people can use it in a really short and sweet way using video and a pretty simple web page was really what helped us elevate above the noise of creating a new hardware product to creating, I think, a platform that other people are using all around the world. So yeah, that's what I've been working on for the last few years.
So you're playing perfectly into my hands here, thank you. Because one of the things that I talk about in digital disruption is the economics of disruption are different. In old disruption, and by old we're probably talking 5 years ago, the disruption that Clay Christensen identified and described at Harvard Business School, it's all still true, and the man is a genius. So by saying disruption itself has been disrupted, I'm not at all talking about the past pejoratively, but what's happened is that old disruption took a lot of money and a lot of time. And most of the case studies that Christensen has identified in his works over the years took decades, and in some cases billions of dollars for those transitions to occur. As a result, they were rare. What we're looking at now, and we're just hearing in 3 very different industries, people who just have an idea, start to move toward the idea, have to organically let it grow, but can tap into networks of people who have property, people who have expenses they need to record, people who are actively looking for projects to support. I mean, we're tapping into these networks of possibility that essentially reduce the cost of getting an idea out there, testing it, refining it, iterating it, and then delivering it. I mean, from A to Z, every single step is cheaper and shorter than it used to be, and making a better outcome than old disruption used to. And so that's what's exciting. So one of the things that we've talked about as a panel is making sure that, although hearing founders' stories is really cool. I love it. In fact, I could listen to these guys talk all day about what they've done. But I've asked them, and they've agreed, and they're excited to talk about, okay, what do we generalize from what we've learned? How could you apply this? And one of the things I want to start with is something that I heard, well, from all of you, but certainly from Eric and here from David, was the idea that you did not intend to build this business. That seems to be a really common refrain. And I'd love for you to, in the digital disrupted space, I'd love for you to reflect on that and talk about what that might mean to someone in the room, about how do you position yourself to passionately pursue something and then look for digital opportunities to go in a completely different direction. Take your pick, jump in.
I'll start. And so I would say I don't know if this is quite the answer that you're looking for, but I would say the biggest secret is not telling anyone. Because I'd say, I think the biggest challenge, so my last company is a company called Red Swoosh. We were acquired by Akamai. Day after acquisition, decided it's like, I want to do something new. And so then basically, in addition to my full-time job, started a second full-time job, which is basically my startup. And so I worked for about 2 years. No, I worked for a year, basically, before I told anything that I was doing. Like, my wife knew, but I didn't tell anybody I was working with, any of my best friends, my family, or anything. And I think that's because when you're getting started, especially the first year on something new, it's just endless failure. It's just so depressing, because it's like you're starting something new. It's like, I got this idea. It's going to be awesome. And you look into it like, actually, that's completely stupid. And that you do that about 1,000 times. And in this particular case, I'm talking with banks. I'm trying to get permission. I'm just getting shot down one after another. And so demoralizing, just so horrible. And it's bad enough to sort of suffer that humiliation in private. But if you're always telling us, like, guys, I got this great idea. And like, then the next week, it's like, forget all that. That was dumb. You were totally right. That was a stupid idea. But this new idea is great. And do that 100 times. It was like, I just couldn't stomach it. And so I think for me at least, I'd say the key was starting in private to iterate on something and to not really have any bias about where you're going, but just or to have sort of less focus on a particular destination, much more about a process. And that for me, the process was I want to solve a problem that I've personally experienced, that I'd pay to have solved, something that can be sold directly to individuals, something that deals with money. I figured the best way to make money is to find some way to sell money. It works well for the banks, why not me? And so basically just churning on this idea and through these horrible ideas for a long time. And then eventually that's how we sort of started this prepaid debit card thing that created a problem that we couldn't launch that until with permission of the banks. From there we had a problem. It's like, well, we're like too scary. So expense reports is this Trojan horse, which is going to make us look safe to the banks. And then we launched, and then MasterCard shuts us down the day after launch, and we're like, fuck, now what are we gonna do? Well, I guess now it's like people seem to like this expense report concept, so let's figure out what that's all about. And then a series of these problems, and each time realizing you're climbing through this mountain, and like, you're hacking through this jungle, and then and it's like, oh my God, we're being attacked by lions and everything. It's just horrible. But then eventually you end up in this, vast plateau, and it's like, where am I? It's like, this place is beautiful. There's there's opportunity everywhere, and no one knows about this place. No one even believes it exists. And no one could have ever found it there had they started searching.
Okay, and so I'm hearing two things in what you said. Not only they keep it to yourself in the early stages, but there came a point where you had to share it, and then you were exposed to new problems that you didn't identify. And it's persistence. There's nothing fundamentally revolutionary about persistence other than you were digitally equipped to do it.
Well, and I think also keeping your costs very low.
Okay.
And I think that maybe that's, I love Innovator's Dilemma. I don't read a lot of pop psychology or pop business books, but that's one that I really like. And I think that you're right. The challenge before is that business was so expensive, and so you could only take one shot, because after that, like, you're just out of money and you're done. But in our case, it's like you can, it's not like a 6-shooter, it's like a machine gun. You can just keep shooting all day long in different ideas, because it's cheaper to build it and to try it than to sort of test it. It's like you don't have to do market research and things like this, though Forrester is wonderful. But basically, just give it a shot, because really no one knows. It's like, if it's a great idea, if it were obvious, someone else would be doing it. And so any idea that's amazing, most people think is stupid. And so the worse idea it sounds, the better it probably is.
I would love to get these two guys in here to talk about whether they think you should keep it to yourself or not. Because I know people who passionately disagree, who think we should just tell all the world about our ideas. And we're really happy to welcome Greg Duffy on stage from Dropcam.
Thank you. Best lesson I ever learned at Dropcam, always leave earlier than you think you should. Maybe best lesson never learned.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Let me wrap up this question, then we're going to come to you to have you introduce yourself in just a minute.
Yeah.
So just quickly, I'd love to hear your reaction.
Well, what I'm hearing
gentlemen.
here is that disruptive ideas, they need refinement. I mean, you come up with a new way of thinking about something, and your first take isn't going to be something that you want to share with your family or bring to market. You got to refine it. That often takes years of development, or at least a year. And I think on the entrepreneurial journey, myself included, like, it was probably 2 years before my dad thought what I was doing was like valuable.
It was
He
real.
always ask these probing questions like, so how's it going? Are you doing anything else? When do you think you might do X, Y, Z, right? And I could kind of tell what he was getting at, which was that he didn't understand what I saw, which I had a vision for something. I saw that there was a value proposition here, and although it wasn't refined yet, that I saw progress, and I thought we could get there. And so you gotta. My number one piece of advice to entrepreneurs is to pace yourself, right? It never happens in the first year, and I think part of the conditioning for pacing yourself is, be cautious with what you say and who you share it with, because you're gonna tell your crazy idea, and you're gonna be so excited about it, and someone's gonna shoot you down. And that can be hard. And so sometimes it's better to just be a little bit more reserved about it. At the same time, I also believe in mentorship and getting support. And if you're trying to do something on your own and you're not getting feedback from peers who understand what you're doing, you're a lot less likely to succeed. And so from that perspective, I'm very much about sharing.
Eric, you can either comment on this. I know you were originally going to answer the original question. Go for it.
I think the keys that I've learned so far over the period of 5 years of up and down along the way is to make sure that you're able to monitor and detect what people like about your product. Sometimes they're counterintuitive. Sometimes the things that people like about your product are not exactly what you intended. And I think initially that struck me as a tough idea to wrap my head around, because I felt like what I was working on was what I wanted to focus on, but reacting to what people were saying. Like, so for example, in the early days of our product, we basically manufactured them, these watches in our garage, and just shipped them out by FedEx. We would send them out, and then in a couple days, we would email the person that received the watch, and we were shipping maybe I think the total we had shipped at that time was about 100 watches. So we started emailing our customers, and sometimes they would just email us out of the blue. And we would get into these interesting conversations with people who were using basically alpha hardware, like things that we had just assembled ourselves. And the comments and the discussion and the ideas that our users, our very early users, gave back to us were some of the things that helped guide our product development, as well as how we explain the product to other customers.
Was it painful?
It was mainly comments from my dad, so yeah, it was pretty. But early users, you have to be very careful with early users. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, Greg, thank you for joining us from Dropcam. What we did in the beginning is we asked everyone to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they do, but also a disruption that they've done lately or have seen lately, worth talking about. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Greg Duffy. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Dropcam. So probably the coolest thing about Dropcam, similar to Eric, we started out shipping every single camera from my co-founder and I packing peanuts boxes. It was a mess. And now we actually run a cloud service that takes in more video than YouTube. So the difference in scale has just kind of been amazing for us, and I think that's probably the biggest disruption is bringing software and services to a category of what used to be just hardware and almost creating a whole new market by doing that, a whole new product, something that didn't exist before.
Why don't you describe it for anyone who's not familiar?
Yeah, so Dropcams are Wi-Fi cameras and a cloud service that lets you view them from anywhere. So people use them for everything from security, like home monitoring, baby monitoring, pet monitoring. We've had people catch everything from their kids' first steps to burglars. The cool thing about a Dropcam is it's kind of like, it's a camera that doesn't have a record button. It's always recording. And the cloud service keeps around the video, and you can later decide which video was important. We help you do that, and it makes you capture moments that you never would have before with a standard video camera.
Not that I'm prone to look for really cool connections here, but what we're talking about, we have the two of you on hardware on the end. Both of you have said that the service experience of the hardware it turns out to be more important than the hardware, which I think is a fundamental. If you want to take that home as a lesson, especially if you're in hardware, take that home as a lesson. I mean, it's not the hardware anymore. And this is a lesson that Sony, for example, needs to learn. It's not about the device. It's about the experience that you build around that. It's we have some folks from Apple in the room who that's something they know about hardware. So that is interesting. But I think it's also just about physical stuff, like your treehouse. When you add a digital experience around it, becomes a lot more interesting and more useful or monetizable, as the case may be. And I think this is one of the cool lessons about digital is that it's not about digital stuff only. It's not just about apps and games and digital movies on Netflix. It's about your treehouse, for heaven's sake, and what digital can do, or your money, about what digital can do to help you get more out of it. So to me, talking about digital disruption is potentially narrowing because it makes us think, well, we're talking about your smartphone and your apps. But none of what you guys have talked about is really about your smartphone. Your smartphone just ends up being a huge enabler. Comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, digital, the internet, et cetera, is just a means to hopefully an end, some other ends. And I think what's really amazing is you can basically, increasingly what I'm seeing is that the online world is changing our offline world, right? Not just enabling business, but in our case, changing fundamentally human behavior. And I think you're seeing this a lot more with sensor technology, Google Glass, et cetera. There's a closer integration between the technology and how we conduct our lives. And when you start doing things differently, there's kind of different properties and that creates an opportunity. So for our example, by creating a platform that is so frictionless and builds trust that regular people are renting out their extra rooms, well, it turns out these people, they don't have any sunk cost. So whereas a hotel or a vacation rental, someone has made an investment in a property, these people are taking and monetizing something that they already have, that they've already sunk, they have no fixed cost on that. And so they can offer something that's unique at a very competitive price point. It's just incredible. And this has kind of blossomed into something much bigger that's being called the sharing economy. The idea that people have all these things, whether they're physical things or even their own time, that go underutilized. And now technology platforms allow us to share access to those things and perhaps even monetize them.
Well, and that's happening at such a broad scale. It's extra cars, extra home rooms in your home like you're talking about. It's also just the self-publishing platform on Amazon. I have extra ideas in my head that I want to get out there, and an agent doesn't deem them worthy of his or her time. And so I'm just going to put them out there. And some of them are terrible. And some of the homes that people probably rent probably aren't that great either. Although they would quickly learn through the feedback mechanism that it's not that great. I mean, that's the beauty of this, is that everyone can play.
And so I think the common theme here is that we've all created tools that are empowering people to new behaviors, new use cases.
So how do you see those new behaviors coming? Is this a personality thing? Do we just have the four of you on stage because you all have the kind of personality that just wants to do this?
No.
No. What then?
No, I think there is something interesting going on here, even on the hardware side of things. Maybe Eric had a similar experience, but when we first got started, we listed our product on Amazon without talking to anybody at Amazon by doing FBA, fulfillment by Amazon. So it's actually a way for you to get out in the marketplace and like prove out an idea. And probably Eric has an even better example in Kickstarter, being a way to get momentum behind an idea without having to go first and open up big retailer accounts. Another interesting thing, going back to your question about what is it really about? It's about the whole user experience. And actually, in our cases, I would say you can't take out the hardware from that. It's not that the hardware isn't important. It's that it's not enough. It's necessary but not sufficient. You have to do the whole thing. You have to do the apps. You have to do the software, the user experience, the services, the hardware, everything together in order to get something that the user wants to buy these days, because the bar has just been raised. The devices like the iPhone, when they came out, changed the world of cell phones and smartphones. In fact, there were smartphones before the iPhone, but they were virtually just nobody knew what they were in the mass market. And it's just because they brought that big kind of all-encompassing user experience that they were able to win.
Actually, and to maybe add on to that, I think it's interesting, the notion of necessary but not sufficient. And I would say, on one hand, launching a product requires, or a disruptive product today requires taking on a much bigger surface area than in the past.
Which could seem daunting, right?
Which could seem very daunting, because now you can't just launch a watch. You also have to have the services and the apps, and it has Bluetooth and all the stuff. It's like any one of those would have been a whole company a decade ago. But now it's like, yeah, a tiny startup can do that in their garage, of course. And so on one hand, you have to take a much bigger vision, but it's possible to do so because there are these networks already in place. There's these tools, the technology is available, and so forth. And so I think, when you mentioned mobile apps, for Expensify, I would say that the reason the mobile app is so valuable isn't just because, yes, expense tracking is a mobile thing, but the existence of the iPhone. So what made Expensify work was one day the iPhone got an autofocus camera. So for the first time, you could take a good, high-quality receipt image at the same time that the iPhone App Store existed, which enabled us to acquire individual users at zero marginal cost. And these users are people who exist in companies. And then also, at the same time, expense reporting is viral, where every time you submit an expense report, you're promoting us to the decision maker. And so it's a combination of all these things happening at the same time. It's like autofocus cameras, app stores, smartphones, internet, always-on connectivity, viral dynamics, consumerization of the enterprise. If any of those weren't in place, Expensify wouldn't be here today. It's like Expensify couldn't exist 5 years ago. And so it's like we just happened to be, a door opened. We were the first one in line, and we certainly didn't plan it. As I mentioned, it's not like we okay, but the business plan is we're going to kind of hang out here. We're going to wait for iPhone to launch an iPhone autofocus camera. Like, that doesn't work that way. And so I think, yeah, it's about being in the right place and just always being ready for the opportunity and being open to jump through that door when it opens, no matter what that door might be.
Anybody else want to comment on the personality question?
Well, I think one of the pieces of advice that I picked up at Y Combinator, an incubator here in Mountain View, was advice from Sam Altman. He said one of the keys to making a good startup is to not let your startup die. And if you can fulfill that promise, then by definition you have something that's worth talking about and that's worth working on. So for no lack of trying on our own, we've taken that to heart, and we've seen over the course of several years just a progression of things working, things not working, but at the end of the day, always going back and trying to fix what problem you had, and it seems like just through that process of improving what you have, you can iteratively get not only your product better, but I think your company. And that's one thing that I learned, is that starting out to make a product is not necessarily, a lot of people say at the beginning when you're working on an individual product that you're trying to sell is, what's the greater vision, what's the company around that product? But at the end of the day, if your product is not something that people want, you're not going to be able to build a company around it. And so I resisted initial questions and initial kind of pressure to create a company rather than a product. And I think that worked out well for me. I'm interested to hear about other people's perspectives on that as well.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I would say one thing that guided us early on was that something that Paul Buchheit said about Gmail. He said it's better to have 100 users that love you than 1,000 users that like you. Right? In other words, build something and find a group of people who are truly passionate and for whom this truly resonates, and iterate from there, and you'll find your way to mass market. And with Airbnb, the inspiration for Airbnb came long before we wanted to create a company around it. So there's 3 of us co-founders. My 2 partners are designers. In October 2007, there was a design conference in San Francisco. Hotels were sold out, and it just so happened that we had been all living together. I had just moved out. They were having trouble paying rent. They decided to rent out the extra bedroom that was now vacant to designers who needed a place to stay. And so they made some money that weekend. Designers got a place to stay when they otherwise had no options. And they all went to the conference together and had a great time. And so this was a one-off experience that worked out well for everyone. It wasn't until a few months later that the 3 of us got together and we were like, we want to start a company together. And we were trying to work through different ideas. And this was not our first idea. I mean, this was actually a little bit of an afterthought. We had worked through many other ideas first that came to mind. And then we said, you know what, remember that experience a few months ago when you guys did that? That sounded like it was a value proposition that worked for everyone. Why don't we make a website that facilitates this, that does this for other people, other situations? And so sometimes these disruptive models can be so unpolished, and they can go overlooked. And from that idea, we had to refine it a lot to get it to where it is today. I think one of the things I heard was you have to have the timing has to be right, which I think is true for us. But you also want, even if you have the right timing, you have to iterate so much in order to find that product market fit, to find something that's going to resonate with a broader audience. First with the 100 users that love you, but then something that can be mass appeal.
If I've been counting, we've probably said the word iterate or some variation on it maybe 100 times so far in our conversation together. So I think that's clear, and hopefully that's a message that's landing with you in your individual roles. But I'd like to talk about that inflection point where you're iterating based on feedback from mentors and then your earliest 100 people who are passionate about you or so on. And then there's an inflection point where suddenly you've got data. All 4 of you have businesses that are generating amazing amounts of user data, I'm assuming. That's got to change the way you iterate, and even the speed at which you iterate. Can anyone jump in and talk about what having this data? You talked about it explicitly in your opening remarks, David. I mean, having all this data about how people spend, what do you do with that?
Well, okay, so there's 2 different types of data, though. One is sort of user behavior, and one is sort of the data that they're sharing. And I guess I would say I'm a bit contrarian into the former. I think that data is super overrated. And that I would say when you need the data the most, you have the least. And it's like, and I think people, especially when you're like brand new startup and you don't have any users, maybe even if you have 100 users who love you, it's like it's not super statistically relevant. And how do you know that those 100 are actually representative of the millions out there? And so I'd say your toughest decisions in a startup are never informed by data. By the time you have data, you should have decided a year ago. And you probably already did, and the only reason you got the data is because you made the right bet. Because if you didn't make the right bet, you'd be dead and you'd have no data. And so I think the companies that stress out about like we're going to A/B test everything, we're going to do this research and blah blah blah. It's like I don't know those companies. Like I mean, you can refine through data, but you can't innovate through data.
Okay.
And so that's my summary of that.
Yeah, I would
Go
actually,
for it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would say data is a very important way to make incremental gains, and incremental gains are critical, and maybe that's the majority of what you do in the lifespan of your company. But to come up with those truly disruptive ideas, those aren't informed by data.
Okay.
They're often informed by a single individual or a small set of individuals who have a vision for something. And oftentimes, I think from their own experience, like the story I just shared. Or, as we refined our product, another example is we launched something that preceded what you see today, which was a much simpler website. It was much like a Craigslist, but just for events and people who wanted to share their room for the event. And Brian, co-founder, went to South by Southwest and used the product. And his host picked him up at the airport, brought him to the house. The host's wife made Brian dinner. The bed was set up beautifully with chocolate on the pillow. Wonderful hospitality. At the end of the night, the host asked, Brian, do you have the money? Because this is before we facilitated the transaction. And Brian said, I forgot to go to the ATM at the airport. Can I bring it to you tomorrow? He said, no problem. Well, the next night he asked again, Brian, were you able to get the money? Brian had forgotten once again to get the money. And suddenly the host got very wary of Brian. Like, who is this person I just met who's staying in my home and has conveniently forgotten twice to bring me the money? And the hospitality kind of evaporated. It got awkward from there. And through that firsthand experience, we reinvented how we thought about this opportunity. So, we had identified a value proposition, but it was still really rough. And through this firsthand experience, we decided, what if we facilitated the transaction? What if we took the money up front and got that out of the way so that once you arrive, it can all be all about the hospitality? And once we did that, we said, well, if we're handling the money, we can give you kind of a confirmed itinerary. I mean, we can actually make this whole process of staying with someone just as streamlined as booking a hotel. And so through some of these firsthand experiences, we refined our vision for what we were to become.
Now, you still do that, right? Among the founders, you're still living on Airbnb and learning from it.
Right, yeah. So there's Brian still actually, for periods of as much as 6 months at a time, has lived on Airbnb, a new place every 4 or 5 days. Basically stress testing the product, understanding that if I live this lifestyle, and if I'm that demanding of the product, can it perform? And honestly, sometimes it doesn't. But through those firsthand experiences, he and we come up for a vision for how we might improve things.
So let me just ask you this rhetorically, Room. How many CEOs of airlines do you think have flown coach on their own airplanes in the last year? Any?
That's a great question.
0. How many CEOs of banks have waited in line to talk to a teller to solve a checking problem? 0. I'm going to guarantee you it's 0. How many, does the CEO of Dell buy Dell computers online and then install them and set them up himself? So this is just over and over we could ask this question.
2 weeks ago, we had a company meeting, and Brian challenged the company, and there's over 500 employees now, all hands meeting. He challenged for a volunteer for someone to live on Airbnb like he has historically, and someone raised their hand. Well, after the meeting, over 50 other folks emailed him to say that they were volunteering to live on Airbnb as well. And so to give you an example of kind of how seriously we take that and what we're trying to promote in order to maintain our edge, I think these are the kinds of things you have to do.
So I'll just say, I keynoted at the Marketing Research Association's annual conference in Orlando on Monday. And I got up there and I told them, guys, you're in trouble. I mean, you teased a little bit about Forrester as a company. I think this is real. We're being disrupted too. Because when someone, instead of needing to go do a survey and take 6 months to get the answers to something, can either just go live the experience themselves or go and talk to their users in real time through some collection of digital media, then yeah, research is in peril. It doesn't mean that we're over with. I'd like to believe we can expand the business just as you're demonstrating you can expand your businesses. All right, I'm getting the sign that it's time to wrap up for Q&A, to let you in on it. What I'd like to do is just give anyone else on the panel a chance while you're thinking of your questions and raising your hands and the runners are going around and collecting your questions. Anybody else want to talk about disruptive processes like Nathan was just talking about of the CEO living on Airbnb?
So I think actually it's probably a pretty good piece of advice that if you're running a startup and not using your own product, that it's going to fail. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter whether it's enterprise or consumer or whatever. If you're not, it's eating your own dog food, and that's been popular in tech circles for a long time. And if you're doing a startup and not doing that, it's going to fail because you're going to lose your connection with the user. It aligns all incentives if you use your own product, and not just from a user experience perspective, but even for Dropcam, for example. Everybody at Dropcam uses Dropcam in their homes, and so things like privacy, for example, are really paramount to us because the same privacy concerns we have, our users have, and so it aligns all incentives. We make your video safe and secure, and all these things kind of just work out as long as you are using your own product. I think that's really interesting. And actually, I'm going to take a bit of a contrarian viewpoint to something mentioned before, which is that maybe data doesn't matter. Paul Buchheit, who was quoted before, also said advice is limited life experience plus overgeneralization. And I think in this case for Dropcam, one of the ways that we use data, we've just started having enough of it to start making an impact on the user experience. So for example, using offline computer vision algorithms to figure out where the important video is in your video stream. These are things where data is kind of just intrinsic to the user experience, using it to improve the user experience. Like Google search, it's the size of the index, it's not the algorithms. And I think you really have to make sure that you don't trend one direction or another on thinking data is important or not important just based on the experiences of one company. It really depends on your product.
Fabulous. Thank you. We'll take our first question. Do we have runners? There we go.
Good morning. Thanks for the comments. I have a question about, and it's really applicable to the whole Kickstarter disruption, and that is so many good ideas are destroyed in the minds of the owner because they believe that money is necessary for them to see this idea come out. And so with this crowdfunding and the challenges doing to the traditional fundraising, do you have any comments about disruptors who are looking to do something and how they go and find the money? Obviously, the Kickstarter, $10 million in 30 days, got a lot of people's attention, but is that something that we can address, how this new disruption in fundraising is really affecting a lot of startups and that type of thing?
I think one thing that people were interested in during our Kickstarter campaign and continuing afterwards through the months after that was just about peering into the process of starting a company and starting a project and building a product. So one of the things that we took to heart after launching on Kickstarter was the idea of transparency and the idea of introducing people into the process. So while we were working on a project that had received funding and that had received the support of people all around the world, we took it as a sign that people were interested not just in the product that we were making, but also the process that went along with that. And so we worked with our Kickstarter backers, and we kept people informed, and I think that has paid off in the long term by allowing us to have built a bit of a community around the product rather than just the product itself. And I think that is sometimes not as easy for companies that are working in siloed environments when you raise money from potentially an institutional investor and just have your heads down focused on creating a product to sell, rather than actually creating a community and potentially a base to launch other projects and products as well.
So I was talking to one of the country's largest retailers the other day, and they were saying, well, sure, on Kickstarter, those people can raise risky capital. We don't have access to risky capital. And I said, why don't you take one of your projects to Kickstarter and go public with it? Would you recommend that?
I wouldn't necessarily recommend Kickstarter per se, but there are definitely some ways of communicating your ideas and figuring out, are those ideas something that people want?
Okay. I was hoping you would back me on that one. Sorry.
Well, there's another website. My friends have started a website called Self-Starter, which is a little bit of a more open source method of starting something like Kickstarter.
Got it. Okay. Next question. I think we have over here.
First off, David, love your product. Great work.
Thank you.
So question for Nathan. You mentioned that Brian experienced some lack of hospitality when he forgot to show up with the money on his second night. And I was curious, as a CTO, what was your experience like when you had to flip the switch from allowing people to leverage the service free to a model where you were collecting before the service was delivered?
So the site that existed that I referenced when Brian went to South by Southwest, that was merely almost like a Craigslist directory style. That was only in existence for a few months, and then there was a whole bunch of things wrong with that model. It wasn't easy enough, et cetera. It was basically Deadpooled, and we went back to the drawing boards, and over the following 4 months kind of reinvented, came up with this new model and built it. And
New model and a new name, right?
What's that?
Was it a new name too, or was it the other one?
No, so Airbnb is short for Air Bed and Breakfast, which got its name from that original weekend where that extra room that was rented to the designers had no furniture because I had just moved out. And so Joe, another co-founder, had some air beds. He put up the air beds. And so instead of a bed and breakfast, it was an air bed and breakfast. And so that's what they called it that weekend, and that's therefore what we called the website we built for South by Southwest. It was Air Bed and Breakfast. Even when we launched in August 2008, we were still calling it Air Bed and Breakfast. By the end of 2008, we realized, we're actually not renting any air beds anymore. What are we doing calling ourselves Air Bed and Breakfast? just so happened that the shorter domain name Airbnb was available. So in early 2009, we changed the name.
Got it.
But what happened when we changed the model? I mean, there really was nothing before the model. And so it was kind of hard to measure the delta, except to say we went from nothing to eventually something. I mean, it wasn't honestly, it wasn't even just the model that enabled our business to grow. It wasn't until early 2009 when we focused in on building critical mass in New York City, and we started really curating the inventory, that it started to snowball and grow reliably.
Question here, next question.
Sure, thanks. I was curious about each of your level of kind of tech savviness, and if you're all developers, and if you can comment in general on, can you look at the code of your own apps?
Is that necessary?
Is that necessary? And what do you see among your sort of peer disruptors? Does everyone kind of can write code at some level?
I can. I wrote so I was one of the core developers for the first couple of years.
So Airbnb has a pretty diverse set of founders. I think not the typical mold. There's 3 of us. Joe and Brian are both designers. I'm an engineer. So that's kind of a atypical ratio. But I think it actually is one of the reasons why we've been so successful is that we kind of have all our bases covered with our different perspectives. It's really the emergence of art and science. And so there's a wonderful creativity that they bring to the table and how to kind of market ourselves and thinking through what the experience should be. But that has to be paired with the science of bringing that into reality. And finding that right weight is maybe challenging at times, but we obviously found the balance.
Barrett?
I think the key is being able to have enough skill to build something that you can show off your idea. So in my case, I started the company by myself and built a very early prototype of the product just by sort of hacking things together. But that was enough to engage some of my friends and to really build enough interest to be able to get other people to join the team as well.
Greg?
I think for Dropcam, both co-founders are technical software guys, and myself being one of them. And I think it helps, like Eric was saying, in the early days when nobody believes in your idea but you, then you're the only one that can build it. But later on, it actually helps more. I think if you can become the business guy and the tech guy and the guy who sits on stage talking in front of a crowd of people all at the same time, you kind of can grow with the company a little better because you get this fire hose of kind of requests from users and investors and people about what you should be doing next in the product. And being able to put it through the lens of kind of what is technically feasible, how you should prioritize tasks. Sometimes asking for something that sounds simple, like for example, motion detection in Dropcam. Everybody assumes that motion detection is simple because humans are really good at telling whether something has moved in a scene, but it actually is a very hard computer vision problem. So early on, we had a bunch of people asking us to make motion detection better. If we had done that project, that would have been the whole company. And now we can actually start working on it some more now that we've got critical mass. It just helps us prioritize those issues where if we hadn't been technical, we might have decided to do it early and then we would have never been able to create the rest of the product. So there's a bunch of things that just provides a lens for prioritization when you have a technical bend and you're running a business.
So based on the experience of the 4 of you, it would seem like a national imperative that we teach kids to code in school.
Well, actually, I would say it's not about teaching kids to code.
Okay.
I would say it's about broader, getting people to think around automation. Because I'd say, I mean, at one point, typing was like a specialty, then email, then like Excel. And like these are things that's like, well, obviously you can do that. But today's high-tech skills are tomorrow's just remedial courses. And I think that there's like this general trend. And, but I think the key isn't so much, it's like you don't need to know like C or Java or whatever. Because I think programming is really just about problem solving. It's about having a way to describe a clear goal, to understand incremental steps to get to that goal, and to communicate that goal to other people. And I think it's about, and more importantly, it's about communicating it to a computer. Because really, like, whenever something goes wrong, we like to joke, it's like, oh, it works exactly as coded. Which means it's like, of course, it does exactly what you told it to. It's just it obeys your every whim, as flawed as your whims are. And I think but I think the advantage of being technically minded, and we're living a step maybe in the future of the idea of A computer is so dumb, it forces you to know exactly what you want and make no assumptions. But when you take that same mentality, you can apply that to everything. Like computer programming is no different than management, than sales, or anything else. It's all about defining a process, executing the process, communicating the process, and so forth.
Fabulous. That's one to take home, I think, for those of you who are out there thinking, how do we think like this and act like this? Next question. Do we have one queued up? In the back.
Hi. Another crowdfunding question, I guess, for Eric. With your Kickstarter campaign, was it pure virality, or did you have to make some significant upfront, communications investment type thing in order to get it going?
I think the key for us was actually simplifying our message. So we'd been working for 4 years on the product and had quite a bit of experience talking to people about what we were making. And I think one of the major advances that we made with our Kickstarter project was simplifying things down to 3 main goals or experiences that people could have with the product. We took those, we made a video around that, and kept it short and sweet. We did do some pre-marketing for the project. So for example, we had been collecting email addresses for about 2 years leading up to that point for people who were interested in an iPhone-capable smartwatch, which we weren't capable of making at that time. So we had a list of about 7,000 people lined up. So the moment that we launched our project, we did a nice email blast to all of these people and got the message out. We also chose to launch at the same time as we gave an exclusive to a blogger to help us sort of get the message out. But I think that combined with the fact that we already had a fairly, interested potential market waiting for us, and we were able to get the message out through those two means.
So I've got a question. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the interesting things about Eric's story there is that, like, the key message there is that it probably is really hard to just decide, I have an idea, I'm going to go to Kickstarter and raise $10 million. There was 4 years of thinking that went into smartwatches and what to do, what are the important problems, how do we build these things, how do we build them with a good cost of goods and plan for mass manufacturing and all these other things. And then you guys solidified the idea and came up with your 3 core things and were able to run a massively successful Kickstarter campaign. So if you think it's just easy money, that's not what it is. This is hard-won kind of, there was company building and product building and just kind of developing an idea of what exactly a smartwatch is and what's important and how you build one before that was able to happen, right?
Yeah, and I think you see that in many successful companies. We all have the benefit of hindsight sitting up here, but it's true, yeah.
Well, but the challenge then is, and this is my question to you and to all of you, is when you take advantage of this, like 4 years of work, yes, but then you said, hey, we've got an email list, we've got a blogger relationship, and we have Kickstarter, let's go do this digitally disruptive thing to carry us to the next level. You stir the pot at that point. I mean, Samsung holds a press conference saying, well, we're working on a watch too. And rumors about Apple's watch keep coming and surfacing. You're stirring that pot. I mean, all of you guys are stirring somebody's pot somewhere by being digitally disruptive. And sometimes that makes them sue you or makes them angry. I mean, how do you deal with that? Is that a sign of progress? Probably is. Nathan?
Yeah, it's a high quality problem to have, I suppose. I mean, that means you are doing something that has gotten someone else's attention and that someone's taking you seriously enough to raise issue. And I can't think of any disruptive company that hasn't come into controversy in the process and in the different ways that you mentioned.
Even internally, and maybe this is one for larger companies represented in the room to think about, is that here they're talking about people who don't like what they're doing, out in the world, whether it's municipalities with Airbnb or whether it's Samsung with watches or what have you. But internally, your department comes up with the best idea ever for the company. You've tested it for a year, and then you go share it, and you get internal resistance, right? I know you're all in the startup mode, but can you give people in that situation a bit of advice about how do you put your head down and figure out how to persist even when the internal politics, never mind the external disruptive politics, are facing you?
Well, one of the things we do, or we ask ourselves, are we taking big leaps? And we don't always want to be taking big leaps. A lot of the times we want to be making incremental improvement. But every so often we want to do something that kind of fundamentally changes the game for our business. And that's when we're basically disrupting ourselves, whether it's the switch to mobile or when we introduce the $1 million host guarantee. These are big things that they didn't come about through incremental improvement. It's like someone had a big idea, it was a little controversial, And then we said, you know what, let's go for it. I think in terms of getting support for that internally, first there needs to be a recognition that there are these two different paths, and that both paths are important, and you want to have a certain ratio of big leaps to incremental gains. And then you need to recognize who within the company are the big thinkers that come up with the big leaps, and who are the folks that help to make those things possible. And just making sure that everyone knows their role, and that one thing isn't necessarily coming at the cost or for lack of appreciation of the other thing, I think is pretty critical. So developing a language within your organization for talking about this change and the role that each people play is, I think, pretty critical.
Which is a very human skill. This is not something we engineer. It's not code. Can't solve that problem.
Yeah, as we become a bigger organization, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, David.
And I guess I would say also making sure that sales has something to gain or that you can route around them. And I would say Innovator's Dilemma is talking about the biggest challenge of a company disrupting itself is that even before your disruptive product has made any money, you've cannibalized the revenue of your existing successful product. And so, because generally disruption comes at a dramatically lower price point, and so you have, your salespeople are commissioned to sell to the biggest companies in the world, and you come out with a small thing at 1/10 of the price, and then some of your companies go for that. Like you become your own worst enemy. And so I'd say that's a real challenge for disruption is how to avoid cannibalizing your own revenue. And I guess Clayton Christensen would say it's not possible. No one does it. No one successfully disrupts themselves. And so I'd say if you really want to be disruptive, leave. It's like it's the only proven technique that works.
Well, and also having a realistic outlook that if you don't disrupt yourself, someone else is. And so I think companies need to come to terms with that and then just understand evolution.
Well, and especially now, right? Because 10 years ago, 20 years ago, disruption from the outside was going to take a while. You could see it coming. It was costly. There were issues. But now it can show up tomorrow. Okay, any last question? Take a last question right here.
I have a question. It's adjacent to the last one, and that is, as you look at companies through the valley and actually just globally, as they scale and grow, they lose they change their culture. It becomes slower. It becomes more institutionalized. How do you keep that disruption of culture going internally so that you can create not only a new product but really consumer and customer experience passion that is scaled?
Yeah, great question. Ideas?
So I think you just have to leave room for particularly engineers to kind of go off into a room and do stuff without being bothered. Like it's kind of a funny thing. It's hard to do when you scale and you're thinking about product management and you're thinking, I need to have all these meetings to tell people what to do. But to a certain extent, if you hire people who are kind of, they're generalists. They understand what good product is. They understand what good design is. An engineer who can look at an iPhone app and say, this is ugly and this is beautiful, is much more powerful than one that can just write the underlying code. And you let those people have extreme flexibility in doing new things. It's kind of like an engine. You want to have a good fuel-air mixture to keep it running. And the fuel is kind of the core business. The air is kind of the ability to go off into a room and do a skunkworks project and come out and say, look at this cool thing. Are we going to now roll this into the product and make it awesome? If you lose that, you're no longer a startup anymore. So you better be doing hundreds of millions or billions in revenue by that time and be ready to grow at 10 or 20% per year.
So I got to give David a chance to chime in with something that his company does to kind of keep it fresh. Do you want to talk about this? I love this.
So you're talking about our offshore?
I am.
So every year we take our whole company overseas for a month. This is basically the eating your own dog food technique, and because we do two things. One, everyone gets free lunch every day at the biggest cafeteria in the world called San Francisco, and just submit an expense report and you're good to go. But likewise, every year we take the whole company overseas for a month, and again, it's all about let's test our international currency support, conversions, and blah blah blah, all this different stuff. And I would say that as far as keeping the company fresh, I'd say the best ideas that we ever have come when the company is overseas, because it seems like it would be like, how could you be productive basically working on a beach in Thailand? Except in reality, it's like the beaches in Thailand are kind of small and they're beautiful, but there's only so much swimming you can do in a day. And after that, it's like you're surrounded by a culture that's foreign to you. You don't speak the language. You don't know anyone else there except for the people you work with. You're 12 time zones away from everyone you know, and so you have nothing to do but work. And likewise, but the work is fun because you hire the sort of people that want to do it, and you attract them because you're doing this. They come to you and they're excited about it. Yeah. And likewise, you're spending so much time with them. It's like you're on a train in the jungle and everyone's batteries died hours ago. There's no internet, and all you have is a bottle of whiskey. And so it's like now you can actually take the time to talk about the very long-term things and get crazy. Like all of our best ideas come basically from these trips where like we launched Bitcoin support, for example. And so it came about because we're like, we've got this problem of international reimbursement. What should we do? And someone's like, we should launch Bitcoin. We're like, yeah. Actually, maybe we should launch Bitcoin. That could work. And so I think that it's about. I don't know if you can refresh a culture. I think it's something that you have to be vigilant on every single day. And I think that it's about, like everyone talks about, a really great person can be 10 or 100 times more effective than an average person. But then they just go hire 10 or 100 times more average people. I think if you really believe the disruptive power of the individual, it requires a consistent commitment from the start of the company and throughout to only hire those people that really fit that mold and to create a company that's always attracting and inspiring them. It's just that over time, the talent density increases over time. And it's incredibly hard. And I think we struggle with it constantly. I think everyone struggles with it. And so I don't know if you can just retrofit an existing company. I think the skunkworks approach is probably the best. It's like, take your best people, put them in a room away from everyone else, and say, you are the elite squad. Everyone obeys you. And the rest of the company is going to be pissed. But you know what? Maybe that's okay. I don't know.
Maybe it's worth the risk. Guys, parting advice as we wrap up here. Anything you want to throw out that we didn't get to say that you think would help these people as they try to be disruptive in or outside of their current organizations?
I would just say, to be kind of self-aware about your organization's strengths. Again, who are the big thinkers in the organization? Who are the entrepreneurs? Are we making big leaps? Are we taking incremental gains? Are we creating a space for these people to kind of come up with their ideas? Are we taking time to go off-site and basically break our daily pattern so that we have some new thoughts? These are simple things, but a lot of, I think, organizations aren't self-aware or don't do anything about these simple ideas. But I think they're readily practicable.
Probably one of the interesting threads that I see woven through all the people up here on this stage is the advice used to be from Y Combinator, make something people want. I think that's probably changing a little bit these days to make something people want to pay for. And everybody here up on stage, this is 5 years ago, we would have all been telling you about our tens of millions of users, and instead we're telling you about our businesses that build things that make people's lives better in ways that they want to pay for. And so there are business models from the beginning. If you don't have a business model at the beginning, that's no longer cool anymore. So make sure that you have an idea of that people actually value you enough to hand you dollars, to hand you money for what you're building early on. A lot of companies waited too long and had tens of millions of users and no dollars, and it turns out you can't really go to the store and buy things with eyeballs. So
I wouldn't necessarily be afraid of asking people to pay for your product. I think a lot of the times people work and they keep thinking that they can improve their product and that they don't really believe that people would pay them or compensate them for it. But I would take the chance. I would ask people, are you willing to pay for it? And I think you'll be surprised at how willing people are to pay for something that they want to use, even if it has like a modicum of usability or utility to that person.
Thank you. Thank you all. Absolutely fabulous panel. I appreciate each of your contributions and your attention as well. As Karen's coming back up to take the stage and take the reins over, let's show a round of applause for these folks and what they've done for us today.
This has been an amazing conversation, a real gift. Thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives so freely with us. And James, for your masterful guidance of the conversation. As a small token of our appreciation, we have for you the Churchill Club speaker t-shirt.
All right, I'll take that. Thank you.
Please wear that in very good health. Thanks again to our research partner, Forrester. Copies of James' book are available as a courtesy for purchase outside this room, if you like, on your way home, and maybe James will stick around for a short while to personalize your copy. A video of this program will be available on the Churchill Club YouTube channel within a day or two, and you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful day, and see you next time.
Thank you.